welcome back everybody. Today we are going to be looking at the Cold War by Oversimplified. This is part 1. I've had a few comments actually underneath my videos saying that I should watch this. Obviously I already planned to, but I appreciate you guys commenting on my videos. Obviously helps the channel grow, so yeah. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. So without further ado, let's go.
The year is 1917. Fighting rages on the Eastern Front of the First World War. Both Germany and Russia are on the brink of collapse. Soldier, I need you to bring me this man. Got it. Found him, sir. What? No, not Lenin. Lenin, the Russian communist. What? Why would I need a beetle? Lenin, the Russian communist. He was exiled to Switzerland. You know what? I'll do it myself. Who wants to start a revolution? The Germans put Lenin on a train and sent him all the way back to Russia, hoping he and his mates would create an internal crisis. And create an internal crisis they did. The government was overthrown, and Lenin was in charge. He immediately pulled out of the...
Yeah, so he's done a video on the Russian Revolution as well. Obviously, this one right here is a little... It's very oversimplified. Obviously, you know, the whole channel's model is about oversimplifying history and probably getting people into history, which it did for me. So yeah, but the first, or the October Revolution by the communists was the second revolution that year. There had been already one in February, which saw the provisional government be put in charge and the Tsar, resigned, essentially. So yeah, at that time, Russia had already seen a revolution, but this one was the one that would pull them out of World War I and accept a pretty humiliating peace by the Germans, which obviously didn't really come into effect since Germany went on to lose in the West anyways. So yeah. The lands that they lost were eventually retaken by the communists, by the Soviet Union, either shortly before or after World War II. But he's gonna get into that.
First World War made the country communist, started a 3-year-long civil war, got shot, broke the economy, caused a famine, and then he died. On his deathbed he said, "Hey man, tell whoever's in charge of giving people..."
I think there were like 10 million deaths in the Russian Civil War. So yeah, the first half of the 20th century, you do not want to live in Russia. They lost the war against Japan. They lost the First World War. They had a failed revolution in 1905. They had, I think, 7 million deaths in World War I. They had 10 million deaths in their civil war. Then they went on to have a famine caused by Stalin's policies directly, which I think killed 30 million people. And obviously he had the Great Purge in 1936, which is also being described in Evolution of Evil's episode on Stalin. And obviously then you went on to have World War II, which obviously also, I think there were like 20 million people in the USSR that died. So yeah, I think overall the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire is not a place you wanted to be in the early 20th century.
Not to let that jerk Stalin become the next leader. By the way, who did I put in charge of giving people jobs? That would be Stalin, sir. Ugh. Stalin was a rising force in the Communist Party. He still had some opponents, but conveniently, all of them were arrested or disappeared. So that was lucky. And so...
Yeah, I think the biggest one who could have challenged Stalin would be Leon Trotsky. He was actually, I think, the Minister for Defense after Lenin's death, or Lenin had appointed him as the Minister of Defense, but Stalin actually, he got a pretty bad job at first, which was General Secretary, but he used it to basically make appointments and only invite people that were close to him. And I think he even sent Trotsky the wrong date for Lenin's funeral, which led to Trotsky not being present at Lenin's funeral. So obviously that would tarnish his image immensely, you know, because he's not really showing respect to the man that he claims to have admired so much if he doesn't even show up at his funeral. But that was because Stalin had sent him the wrong date, and then it was too late. So yeah, the Stalin would spend the next 5 or 6 years consolidating his power, and by the beginning of the 30s, he was pretty much a dictator and in charge of the Soviet Union 100%, pretty much.
Stalin took over. He implemented his 5-year plans, which transformed the country from an agriculture-based economy to an industrial one. And like Lenin before him, he reigned with terror. Anyone who dared criticize or oppose him would either be killed or left to rot in the horrendous Soviet work camps. Then a short man with a silly mustache tried to take over the world, punched the Russians all the way to Moscow, and then the Russians, with some help from their faithful ally, the Winter, punched them all the way back to Berlin. At this point, being allies, America, the UK, and the Soviet Union were good chums. They held a couple of conferences near the end of the war to decide what would happen next. Hey Stalin, after all your trials and tribulation, you must be pretty happy to be standing here in Berlin. Tsar Alexander made it all the way to Paris.
Yeah, so what he's talking about right now is the end of the Napoleonic Wars, which saw Tsar Alexander take his army all the way to Paris, along with the Austrians and the Prussians and the British. And yeah, I think the Napoleonic Wars is probably my favorite historical topic. And yeah, I'll be making a reaction on that very soon.
Hey, just give me a second. Hey man, I think something's up with Stalin. I know, right? What should we do? Shall I tell him about the bomb? Yeah, tell him about the bomb. That will scare him. So, we got this crazy new big A-bomb that can destroy an entire city in one go. Yes, my spies told me already. Oh wait, I meant to act surprised. Wow, that's amazing. He already knew. How? Am I sure I want to send nuclear secrets via unsecure public coffee shop Wi-Fi? Am I ever? Dude, use a VPN. Does the A stand for atomic or ass? Then America dropped their big A-bomb on Japan, and World War II officially came to an end. Hooray, we won! Okay, so now it's time to establish the New World Order. Stalin, you're in charge of Eastern Europe. Now, we want you to let them all hold elections. Oh yes, of course, elections. And these elections will be free and fair, right? Oh yes, certainly, free and fair. Definitely free and fair. Communist, 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 communist. If that's not free and fair, I don't know what is. Throughout...
By the way, Yugoslavia was also communist at the time, but I don't think they were a direct puppet state of the Soviet Union, since under, I think the leader was called Tito. He was pretty anti-Stalin, and he actually led a partisan group that managed to liberate Yugoslavia without outside interference. And I think Stalin actually tried to have Tito assassinated a bunch of times and failed, just like the West tried to assassinate Fidel Castro and also failed a bunch of times. So yeah. And I think Albania was also communist.
Communist, 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 communist. If that's not free and fair, I don't know what is. Throughout Eastern Europe, Soviet puppet governments were established as a buffer zone between the USSR and the West.
Yeah, now it's in there. Okay. But yeah, I think the part of the Warsaw Pact were only those other ones, except Albania and Yugoslavia.
With Churchill proclaiming an Iron Curtain had descended across the continent, the relationship between the old allies was deteriorating fast. Over the next few years, the British intervened in the Greek Civil War to prevent a communist takeover. In Turkey, the Russians began demanding more control of Turkey's sea access routes, which prompted the US to send their largest battleship to Turkey for a friendly visit. After World War II, Iran was now occupied by both the Soviets and the British, with an agreement to both pull out once...
And the part with the Soviets wanting access to the Black Sea is obviously something that also the Russian Empire before had fought a bunch of wars over against mostly the Ottoman Empire. I've actually read a book a few years back. I think I still have it up here somewhere. Yeah, so it's a German book, and it says Die Macht der Geographie, which means the power of geography. And I think there's a chapter about Russia, saying that pretty much since they didn't really have any access to the open ocean. Obviously they had the Baltic Sea, but that one could have been, in this scenario especially, could have been blocked by Sweden and Denmark. And then you have obviously your if you go through there, you're still in the North Sea, which could be blocked by the British Navy, and Vladivostok on the Pacific coast could be blocked by South Korea and Japan. The Black Sea could obviously be blocked by the Turkish. And even if you make it through there, you still are in the Mediterranean, which obviously could be blocked by the British, who, at least at that time, I think still controlled the Suez Canal. And then obviously this Strait of Gibraltar. So yeah, if you compare that to the Americans, which have direct access to both the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic oceans, Russia is pretty blocked, essentially, from not only world trade but from their navy sort of moving around, and that actually came to haunt them in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, I think it was, when the Pacific fleet of the Russians was defeated, and they sent their Baltic fleet all the way around the world to attack the Japanese fleet, which was then also defeated by the Japanese. So you didn't really even have a united fleet. You had multiple separate ones, one in the Baltic, one in the Black Sea, one in the Pacific, one in the Caspian, maybe even. So, and you didn't really have an opportunity to make a joint sort of naval attack on someone. If you compare that to the British, which obviously is an island state, so their navy could just kind of go around. And that, in combination with obviously Russia having no natural borders in the West, they wanted to make sure that the West, or the capitalist democratic states, which were anti-communist, were as far away from Moscow as possible, which is the reason why they set up so many puppet states all the way into Germany. Oh yeah, by the way, I know they have a few ports on the Arctic Ocean, which could potentially make it possible, but obviously that wouldn't really come into effect before the industrial age. And even right now, it's still sort of, if you look at Murmansk, which is a port they have, basically the north coast, more or less. In the winter, I think the entire ocean on the entire coast is still frozen over, so it's still not perfectly usable all year around, and especially not, nearly 100 years ago.
It's over. The British pulled out. Stalin was like, you know what? I think I might stick around. All in favor of kicking Russia out of Iran? You want to know something? You guys suck. Pressure from the UN forced the Soviets to leave, and with the establishment of NATO, the Soviets had no doubt that the West was out to encircle and destroy them. And America announced the Truman Doctrine, in which they basically said, those guys are not cool, cannot be trusted, and we will do everything we can to prevent the spread of communism around the world. Many view this moment as the official declaration of the Cold War. Back in Europe, everyone was living in a post-apocalyptic void brought on by the Second World War. Cities reduced to rubble, not enough food. It was terrible. This is great. The more they suffered, the more likely it is they'll turn to communism. Dude, you're really messed up. What's wrong with you? My father used to punish me severely.
You can see a trend there when it comes to despotic, tyrannical dictators, since Hitler's father also punished him severely, which is like a little bit of a meme, I think, when it comes to Oversimplified's videos. And he's done I think a 2-part video on Hitler as well, which isn't available in Germany, unfortunately. So yeah, I'll see if I can manage to make a reaction on that one at some point. And Germany, or West Germany, actually joined NATO in 1949. Or no, yeah, it was founded in 1949, and I think they joined NATO in the 50s. But yeah, since obviously with Germany having been responsible more or less for 2 world wars, they first actually planned to deindustrialize Germany and make it sort of an international zone, more or less. But obviously with the relationship between West and East sort of deteriorating, both made sure that their respective parts of Germany would be incorporated into their zones of influence, essentially. And now, obviously, you have the Marshall Plan and the Wirtschaftswunder, which means economic wonder in Germany, which was the rapid rise of the German economy post World War II, which eventually made Germany one of the most, or I think the biggest economy in Europe even before they reunited with East Germany. And the same thing happened with Japan.
Realized what was going on and quickly made a move. Under the Marshall Plan, they sent $12 billion to Western Europe for its economic recovery. The countries of Stalin's Eastern Bloc looked on with envy. Hey, Czechoslovakia, you want to come get some economic aid? Yeah, but I have to check with my mom first. Sorry, America. I can't come. This was a full-on economic battle raging between capitalism and communism in Europe. If the Western nations developed faster and better than the East, that would be a defeat for Stalin. So he set up his own rival economic recovery plan, which he called Comecon, and he also set up Common Form, which gave him more political control over the Eastern Bloc. But nowhere did this economic battle rage harder than in the city of Berlin. Caught over 100 miles behind Soviet lines, the city had been divided up between the Allies, and the Western segments were still under Western control. East Berliners could travel freely to West Berlin, see the economic prosperity, and think, maybe this communism thing ain't so great after all. I'm gonna have fun tonight. You're home late. Oh, Stalin. I was just out with my friends. Friends? You stink of capitalism! You're out engaging in imperialist debauchery again! I swear, Ivan, I can't keep doing this. Stalin wanted the West out, so he said, hey, guess what? I'm blockading all of your supply routes to West Berlin. What are you gonna do about it? I suppose we'll just fly the supplies in. All right, Truman. You in this round. The Berlin airlift was an incredible undertaking and a major success for the Western Allies, and Stalin ended his blockade of West Berlin. His aggressive actions worried the West, but not as much as this did. The Soviet Union had developed their very own atomic bomb. The USA no longer had a nuclear monopoly. The world now knew that if a major war broke out between the two superpowers, it would be more destructive than anyone could imagine.
Yeah, probably be pretty much meaning the end of the world. Especially because those bombs were also just a lot more powerful than those two atomic bombs that the US dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, yeah, especially now, there wouldn't be any winner of a war. There would only be a big loser and an even bigger loser of the war, since even the winners would have their country completely destroyed. If there even was a winner, if anyone would even survive that kind of conflict. So yeah, if the atomic bomb never existed, I do think it's likely that we would have seen World War III. And luckily that didn't happen.
It was comforting when Stalin came out and said that war between the Soviet Union and the West was unlikely. Oh, wait, inevitable. He said it was inevitable. Hey, you know who I haven't checked in on in a while? My good friend China. Whoa, what happened to you? What happened to them was a full-blown civil war that had been going on since 1927. The People's Liberation Army, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, successfully defeated the Republic of China, who fled to Taiwan. The now communist China and the Soviet Union signed a mutual defense treaty. This was terrible news for the West. But wait.
And there's actually also an episode of Evolution of Evil on Mao Zedong, and obviously that's an even more oversimplified version of the Chinese Civil War, since the nationalists were pretty much in charge throughout the 20s and 30s, and I don't think they would have lost the war, since the communists were already retreating into more inland territories to kind of consolidate, and it was only pretty much the Japanese invasion of China, of which the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek had to, defend against more so than the communists. I think they even combined their forces and fought alongside each other, at least for the time of the invasion. But yeah, the nationalists took the larger part of the punishment, and after the Second World War were in not that good of a state to continue to fight a civil war against the communists, which was the reason why the communists went on to win.
There's more. After the Second World War, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. In the north, the Soviets set up a communist regime. In the south, America set up an anti-communist regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Korea under their own regime. Now that he had the bomb, Stalin was feeling a little more cocky, and he finally gave Kim permission to attack. The North launched a surprise invasion of the South on June 25th, 1950. With Soviet aid, the North Koreans steamrolled through, taking Seoul in just 3 days and replacing one ruthless dictator with another. The UN were freaking out and quickly created an emergency force made up of troops from 16 countries to defend the South. The West still held Busan and made landings at Incheon near Seoul. They pushed the North Koreans out of Seoul, replacing the ruthless dictator that had replaced the first ruthless dictator with the same ruthless dictator that had previously been replaced by the new ruthless dictator. And the West then continued all the way up the Korean peninsula. At this point, China was getting worried that the UN may just keep going. The US had sent this guy to lead the operation. After winning the Pacific theater of World War II, General Douglas MacArthur's head was big and his balls were bigger. He reassured President Truman that there was absolutely no way at all that the Chinese would ever get involved. Meanwhile, 500,000 Chinese troops were crossing into Korea. Nuke 'em. No. Nuke 'em. No. Ah, come on. You're fired. The US considered the nuclear option, but now that the Soviets also had the bomb, they didn't want to risk all-out global destruction. The communists pushed the West right back almost to the exact same spot they had all started from, and they ended up in a stalemate where they remained until both sides finally agreed to work towards a peace settlement in 2018. Back in America, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism, so they elected famed World War II General Eisenhower, who is really hard to draw. It's 1953. Hey, Stalin, how you doing? Oh, he's dead. He had a cerebral hemorrhage and his reign of terror kinda came back to bite him in the ass because he had imprisoned all of his best doctors and those that were left were too terrified to treat him. The new leader...
I think he even planned a big Jewish purge, which luckily didn't happen since he died before that.
Nikita Khrushchev called a meeting and said, "Hey guys, you know how Stalin was imprisoning and murdering us all for doing basically nothing? Yeah, he was kind of a jerk. I'm really not sure how this is news to you." Khrushchev went on a campaign of de-Stalinization. Statues of Stalin were taken down, Stalingrad was renamed, and Khrushchev announced that he wanted the Soviet people to be happy and would allow greater freedom in the Soviet Union. So how did that work out? Well, an uprising in East Germany was brutally suppressed, a revolution in Hungary was brutally suppressed, and demonstrations in Poland were brutally suppressed. Although he did finally allow some mild reforms. Back in the Soviet Union, he permitted more cultural expression, but then began banning...
I think there were even a few World War II soldiers on the Soviet side which spent years in German concentration camps, obviously starting with their invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. And since Stalin had put in place a policy of no step back, those that did surrender to the Germans and didn't fight to the death were seen as cowards or traitors. So those Soviet soldiers that were liberated, let's just say, from the German concentration camps would go on to be put into the Soviet gulags in Siberia due to, for cowardice or traitor or treason. And there were actually a few who actually spent more than a decade in German and Soviet prison camps, and only after the de-Stalinization policy was put in place by Nikita Khrushchev were they actually free again if they hadn't died in those nearly 15 years. So yeah, again, you do not want to be a soldier on the Eastern Front of World War II, because that was just bad news.
Stuff based on his own personal taste. Modern art looks like a child urinated on a canvas. Banned. Jazz music sounds like the feeling of needing to fart. Banned. Your poetry is really depressing. How could anyone in the Soviet Union be depressed? You're banned. Khrushchev wanted the Soviet people to be happy, but not like that, or that, or that. Young people began enjoying abhorrent Western pop culture. Son, remove that disgusting imperialist apparel at once. Shut up, Dad. You can't tell me what to do. Well, would you look at that? Turns out he can tell me what to do. The West had initially liked the cut of Khrushchev's jib, but world events soon soured relations even more. The two sides were spying on each other a whole lot throughout the Cold War. The KGB had spies and informants in nearly every aspect of Western life and government. So much...
Which was one of the reasons why they were able to develop their own atomic bomb. I mean, they would have probably at some point created one, since the Soviets just put a lot more money into their military percentage-wise when it comes to the entire economy than the West. But yeah, the reason why they had an atomic bomb, I think in 1950 already, so like 5 years after the US, was due to spies, essentially. And that would become a theme throughout the Cold War.
Whenever the US tried to send spies into the Soviet Union, the KGB were usually ready to arrest them on the spot. Members of the Manhattan Project aided the Soviet Union in acquiring the bomb. Some American officials believed they were on the wrong side. I'll sell you 3 secrets for $5 million. Okay, go ahead. The Allies are digging a tunnel under East Berlin to tap your communications. There's an American agent living at this address in Moscow, and sometimes, when I'm home alone, I like to put on my wife's dresses, sit in the corner, and cry for hours. Very interesting. In America, fear took hold during the Red Scare and the McCarthy trials. American values imploded as fear of communism collided with freedom of thought and expression, and communist kind of became a buzzword thrown around to describe anything people didn't like. Hollywood? Communist. Your next door neighbor's dog? Communist. When the grocery store cashier asks if you need a bag when you clearly can't carry 10 tubs of baconaise in your hands, communist. But one area in particular where the US had an edge over the Soviet Union was in its espionage technology. In particular, U-2 spy planes flew across Russia carrying out surveillance from the skies. There was a nasty incident in 1960 though, when one was shot down and Khrushchev was furious. Who the hell is this? He's a high-altitude weather enthusiast who flew off course. Okay, that sounds plausible. Wait a minute. Why does he have a gun and a poison needle? Because he's a very naughty high-altitude weather enthusiast. But much to America's concern, the Soviet Union appeared to be ahead in the space race. Everyone freaked out when Russia launched the world's first satellite, and then they actually sent a man into space. Even worse, there also appeared to be a missile gap in the Soviets' favor, and Khrushchev was so confident that he even allowed the US to set up a technology exhibit in Moscow, attended by a certain Vice President Richard Nixon. Check this out. We have color TV. Yes, but we've been to space and can obliterate you with our massive nuclear arsenal. Check out this vegetable peeler. Tensions increased further when both sides upgraded their atomic bombs to hydrogen bombs. And after West Germany was allowed to join NATO in 1955, Khrushchev set up the Defensive Warsaw Pact, strengthening the military ties between the Soviet Union and its satellite states. In 1960, Americans decided they wanted a new president who would be tough on communism, so they elected John F. Kennedy. The Soviet Union was advancing its technology, but it was also bleeding its coffers dry, and all of the money was going towards the military, not the people. Life under communism was still as hard as ever, and Berlin remained a thorn in the Soviet side. The contrast between the economically prosperous West and the struggling East was clearer day by day, and East Berliners were still able to freely travel to the West. Now, many of them were deciding to stay there. Millions defected to West Germany via West Berlin, causing Eastern factories to lose workers and taking a heavy toll on the economy. Soviet leaders decided this couldn't continue any longer. First, Khrushchev tried this: leave West Berlin, or else. Or else what? Or else I'll be really mad at you. Yeah, no, we're gonna stay. Listen, man, West Berlin is ours, East Berlin is yours. That's just how it is. Kennedy felt pretty good about his show of American resolve. But wait a second, did you catch that? Let's replay it.
East Berlin is yours.
Uh-oh, Kennedy just told Khrushchev that the USA wouldn't interfere in what the Soviets did with their section of Berlin. So Khrushchev came up with a new idea. We're gonna build a wall, and it's gonna be a big, beautiful wall, and it's gonna keep out all the Mexicans. Oh, sorry, it's gonna keep in all the Mexicans. On August 13th, 1961, Berliners woke up to find their city divided into two, with barbed wire and guards blocking the border between East and West. Over time, a wall was constructed throughout the city. Families were torn apart. Thousands would risk their lives escaping over the wall, and hundreds would die trying.
Let's see if I can read this. Ein Deutschland. Es herrscht Tyrannei in Deutschland. Okay. So I'm not too sure about the first two lines after Deutschland here. It says tyranny rules in Germany, and it's interesting here. It says one Germany, and then a guy wrote rotes, which means red. So one guy wrote one Germany, and another guy put red in there. So probably there were a few sympathizers for the West, and then another one who wanted to turn this around into a communist sort of thing. So yeah, but obviously there were actually, I think, a few films even made in Germany which depicted the life in the DDR, which means the Democratic German Republic, which is a theme sort of for communist dictatorships to call themselves Democratic Republic or People's Republic or whatever. As he said, there were families that were torn apart, and there were people that if you try to climb the fence or the Berlin Wall, and even also just the entire border between East Germany and West Germany, not just Berlin, there were guards with orders to shoot you, essentially, if you tried to cross. And a bunch of people would even die trying, because obviously they didn't know that it would be eventually reunited with the West, or with West Germany, in 1990.
the wall, and hundreds would die trying. To the despair of Berliners, the West were unable.
If you love somebody, set them free. I think my old high school even had a pretty decently sized piece of the Berlin Wall. It's like a 1 to 2 meters. So yeah.
Unable to do anything about it, but the wall did put on full display the failure of the communist system. As Kennedy said, democracy is not perfect, but we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in. As part of the agreement between the two sides, US diplomats were still allowed to travel to East Berlin, but suddenly, East Berlin crossing guards started giving them the business, and Kennedy was like, nah-uh. In October, the US rolled tanks up to the crossing point at Checkpoint Charlie as a show of strength. The Soviets did the same, and the two were in a standoff. They stayed like that for 16 hours, and the world braced for nuclear Armageddon. Thankfully, though, Kennedy called Khrushchev directly and was like, hey man, this is getting way too hot. How about you back your tanks up by an inch and we'll do the same? Sounds good. Okay, how about you back your tanks up by another inch and we'll follow suit? Alright, hey, you want to do another inch? And they both very slowly inched away from the apocalypse. Phew, let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency. It wasn't.
Yeah, he's gonna get into that, but there were a lot more crises to come in the Cold War. A bunch of which would, had they gone a little bit different, would have ended in World War III. We were lucky that that didn't happen. All right, yeah, that's it for today. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to leave suggestions in the comments, please do so. I'll really appreciate it. I'll try to answer all of your requests and everything. So yeah. If you want to help the channel grow, leave a like, subscribe, share the video. You know how YouTube works. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with part 2.